The thunder cracked across the Montana sky as Violet Porter ran through the muddy streets of Columbia, her heart pounding against her ribs like a wild horse. It was 1876, and at 19 years old, she had just committed the one sin her father, Reverend Samuel Porter, could never forgive. The rain pelted her face, mixing with tears as she clutched her shawl tighter around her shoulders. 6 weeks had passed since Edward Blackwell had left town, promising to return and marry her. 6 weeks since she'd discovered she was carrying his child. And only minutes since her father had cast her out of the only home she'd ever known, his voice thundering louder than the storm above. No daughter of mine would bring such shame upon this family. He had roared, his Bible clutched in one hand, finger pointing to the door with the other. You are dead to us now, dead to this town, dead to God. Her mother had wept silently in the corner, not daring to contradict her husband, the most respected man in Columbia. Violet's younger sisters had been sent upstairs, shielded from the corruption of her presence. With nowhere else to go, Violet stumbled toward the only place that might offer shelter, Mrs. Holloway's boarding house at the edge of town. The elderly widow had always shown her kindness, slipping her extra cookies after Sunday service and patting her hand when Reverend Porter's sermons grew particularly fierce. The 2-story wooden structure loomed ahead, a single lantern burning in the window despite the late hour. Violet climbed the steps, her sodden dress weighing her down, and raised a trembling hand to knock. Mrs. Holloway opened the door, her gray hair loose around her shoulders, eyes widening at the sight of the preacher's daughter soaked to the bone and weeping. Good heavens, child! Come in before you catch your death. Violet stepped inside, dripping onto the polished wooden floor. I have nowhere else to go, she whispered. The older woman's eyes softened with understanding. Columbia was a small town of barely 500 souls. News, especially scandalous news, traveled faster than wildfire. Your father found out then? It wasn't a question. Violet nodded, unable to speak as a fresh wave of tears overcame her. Mrs. Holloway guided her to a chair by the fire and wrapped a quilt around her shoulders. I'll fix you some tea, she said, bustling to the kitchen. Violet stared into the flames, her hand unconsciously moving to her still flat stomach. Her life as she knew it was over. Her father would ensure that no decent person in town would speak to her again. Her dream of becoming a schoolteacher would remain just that, a dream. Drink this, Mrs. Holloway said, pressing a steaming cup into her hands. Now we need to think about what's to be done. Edward said he'd come back, Violet murmured. He promised. Mrs. Holloway's lips thinned. Men make many promises, dear, especially handsome ones passing through town. He loves me, Violet insisted, though doubt had begun to creep in weeks ago when his promised letters never arrived. Perhaps, the older woman said gently, but we must prepare for the possibility that he won't return. You can stay here tonight, but Violet, your father holds great influence. I can't keep you long without consequences. The realization hit Violet like a physical blow. Her father wouldn't just cast her out of his home, he would ensure she was cast out of the entire town. What will I do? She whispered. Mrs. Holloway patted her hand. First, you'll rest. Tomorrow, we'll figure something out. But tomorrow brought only confirmation of Violet's fears. By noon, Mrs. Holloway returned from town with a grave expression. Your father spoke at length after service about the dangers of moral corruption, she said carefully. He didn't name you directly, but everyone understood. Mr. Thompson has already told me he'll withdraw his business if I continue to shelter you. Violet sat at the kitchen table, her untouched breakfast growing cold. So soon? I'm sorry, dear. I can give you a week, maybe 2, but after that. Mrs. Holloway's voice trailed off. For the next week, Violet barely left her room. She watched through the window as people passed by, neighbors who had known her all her life now crossing the street to avoid walking past the house where the preacher's fallen daughter stayed. Her mother never came to see her. Her younger sisters were kept away. Only Mrs. Holloway's kindness stood between her and complete desolation. On the 8th day, Violet heard a commotion outside. A group of men on horseback had arrived, trail dust coating their clothes, the unmistakable look of cowboys fresh off a cattle drive. Mrs. Holloway bustled into her room, cheeks flushed with excitement. The Henderson outfit has arrived to stock up before heading north to the railroad. They'll be staying 2 nights. Violet barely looked up from the dress she was mending. What does that matter to me? Because, my dear, they'll be leaving, and you need to leave too. Perhaps one of them could take you as far as Helena. There's a home for unwed mothers there. The idea of being sent away to birth her child alone, then having it taken from her, made Violet's chest tighten with panic. But what choice did she have? That evening, Mrs. Holloway insisted Violet join her in serving dinner to the cowboys boarding at the house. 6 men gathered around the long table, their manner respectful if rough around the edges. Violet kept her eyes down as she placed plates before them, acutely aware of their curious glances. One man stood apart from the others not in dress or manner, but in the quiet way he observed everything. He was tall, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of a summer sky. His light brown hair was longer than fashion dictated, tucked behind his ears. When Violet placed a plate before him, he thanked her in a voice that held the soft drawl of Texas. "You're very kind, miss," he said. Violet nodded without meeting his eyes and hurried back to the kitchen. "That's Nathan Prescott," Mrs. Holloway whispered when they were alone. "The trail boss. He's young for such responsibility, only 24, but Mr. Henderson trusts him implicitly. They say he's as honest as the day is long." Violet shrugged. What did it matter who he was? In 2 days, he would ride out of Columbia, and she would be left to face her bleak future. Later that night, unable to sleep, Violet sat on the porch swing, watching the stars. The spring air carried the scent of wildflowers and the distant sound of laughter from the saloon. "Mind if I join you, madam?" She startled at the voice. Nathan Prescott stood at the bottom of the porch steps, hat in hand, looking uncertain. Proper manners dictated she should refuse. An unmarried lady did not entertain gentlemen callers alone at night. But Violet had already fallen so far from propriety that such concerns seemed trivial now. "If you wish," she replied, moving slightly to make room on the swing. He settled beside her, keeping a respectful distance. For a while, they sat in silence, the only sound the creaking of the swing and the chorus of night insects. "Mrs. Holloway mentioned you might be looking to travel to Helena," he finally said. Violet tensed. "She shouldn't be discussing my affairs." "She's worried about you," Nathan said simply. "Said you needed help but were too proud to ask for it." "Not proud," Violet corrected, her voice barely above a whisper. "Ashamed." He turned to look at her then, his blue eyes reflecting the moonlight. "I don't know your story, Miss Porter, and I won't presume to judge it. But I do know that Helena's a rough place for a woman alone." "I have few options, Mr. Prescott," he nodded, looking out into the darkness. "I understand that. I wanted to say that we're heading north toward the Montana-Dakota border. If you needed safe passage that far, you'd be welcome to travel with us." Violet stared at him, searching for ulterior motives in his offer, but found only sincerity in his expression. "Why would you help me? You don't even know me." Nathan's smile was gentle. "My ma raised me to believe that how we treat those in need reveals our true character. I'd be a poor excuse for a man if I left knowing you faced danger alone." His kindness, so unexpected after days of judgment, and rejection brought fresh tears to Violet's eyes. "I apologize," she said, wiping them away. "It seems all I do lately is cry." "No need to apologize. Life can be mighty hard sometimes." He stood, settling his hat back on his head. "You think about it. We leave day after tomorrow at first light. If you decide to come along, we'll make sure you get where you need to go safely." He tipped his hat and stepped off the porch, disappearing into the shadows. Violet watched him go, a strange feeling stirring in her chest, not hope exactly, but perhaps the first glimpse that her future might hold something beyond shame and isolation. The next day, as Violet helped Mrs. Holloway prepare breakfast, the older woman eyed her knowingly. "Nathan Prescott is a good man," she said casually. "His reputation speaks for itself." "I barely know him," Violet replied, focusing on slicing bread. "Sometimes the Lord sends help from unexpected quarters," Mrs. Holloway continued. "It would be foolish to refuse it out of pride." "It's not pride that concerns me," Violet said softly. "What decent man wants to be associated with a woman in my condition?" Mrs. Holloway stopped what she was doing and took Violet's hands in hers. "Child, the world is larger than Columbia, Montana. Your father's influence doesn't extend forever. There are places where you could start anew, where no one knows your past." "As what? An unwed mother, a fallen woman?" The bitterness in Violet's voice surprised even her. "As yourself," Mrs. Holloway replied firmly. "A young woman who made a mistake but refused to let it define her entire life." That afternoon, Violet ventured into town for the first time since being cast out. She needed supplies if she was to travel, and she couldn't keep relying on Mrs. Holloway's charity. She had saved a little money from helping at the church socials, hidden away in a small cloth pouch. The general store fell silent as she entered, conversations halting mid-sentence. Mr. Bailey, the proprietor who had always greeted her warmly before, now looked through her as if she were invisible. She gathered what she needed: a warm shawl, sturdy boots, dried food for the journey, and placed them on the counter. "We don't serve your kind here anymore," Mr. Bailey said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Your father made it clear." Humiliation burned through her, but Violet lifted her chin. "I have money to pay. Doesn't matter. Take your business elsewhere." He swept her items off the counter. Violet felt the stares of everyone in the store boring into her back as she turned to leave. Outside, she leaned against the building, struggling to compose herself. "Miss Porter." She looked up to see Nathan Prescott approaching, concern etched on his features. "Are you all right? They won't serve me," she said, hating how her voice trembled. Understanding dawned in his eyes. Without a word, he gestured for her to wait and entered the store. Minutes later, he emerged carrying the items she had selected, plus a few more. "You didn't have to do that," she protested. "It was no trouble." He handed her the packages. "Bailey was suddenly quite accommodating when I mentioned that Henderson's outfit might take their considerable business to the next town over." A small smile tugged at Violet's lips. "Thank you." They walked together back toward the boarding house, drawing stares from everyone they passed. "You're associating with me at your own peril, Mr. Prescott," Violet warned. "My father has ensured I'm thoroughly unwelcome in Columbia." "I've weathered worse than a preacher's disapproval," he replied with a shrug. "Besides, we're leaving tomorrow." They reached the boarding house steps and Violet turned to face him. "I've decided to accept your offer of safe passage," she said formally, "if it still stands." Relief washed over his features. "It does. We leave at sunrise." That night, Violet wrote a letter to her mother, not expecting it would ever be read, but needing to put her feelings into words. She explained about Edward's empty promises, about her fear and shame, about her decision to leave Columbia. She sealed it and left it on her bedside table, knowing Mrs. Holloway would try to deliver it. Before dawn the next morning, Violet, dressed in her most practical clothes, packed her meager belongings and crept downstairs. Mrs. Holloway was already awake, a bundle of food prepared for her journey. "I've included some remedies for morning sickness," the older woman whispered as she embraced Violet. "And a letter for the pastor of the church in Bismarck. He and his wife are good people. They might help you find work." Tears stung Violet's eyes. "I can never repay your kindness." "Live a good life. That will be repayment enough." Mrs. Holloway pressed a small pouch of coins into her hand. "Don't argue. It's not much, but it might make the difference when you reach your destination." Outside, Nathan and his men were preparing to depart. A wagon had been added to their caravan, loaded with supplies. "You'll ride in the wagon," Nathan explained, helping her up to the seat. "It's not the most comfortable, but it's safer than horseback in your condition." Violet's hand flew to her stomach, surprise evident on her face. "Mrs. Holloway explained," he said quietly. "Your secret is safe with me and my men." As the sun breached the horizon, casting golden light across the small town, the caravan began to move. Violet didn't look back at Columbia. There was nothing left for her there but judgment and shame. Instead, she fixed her gaze forward, toward an uncertain future but one that at least offered the possibility of a new beginning. The journey north was arduous. Spring rains had left the trails muddy, slowing their progress. The wagon jolted over every rut and stone, leaving Violet sore and exhausted. Morning sickness plagued her, forcing frequent stops. Nathan rode alongside the wagon most days, telling stories to distract her from her discomfort. He spoke of his childhood in Texas, of the years spent learning the cattle business under Mr. Henderson's tutelage, of his dream to one day have a ranch of his own. "What about you?" he asked one evening as they sat by the campfire. "What were your dreams before I ruined my life?" Violet finished with a sad smile. "I wanted to be a teacher. I love children." "That's still possible," Nathan suggested gently. Violet shook her head. "What school would hire an unwed mother? Perhaps not in Columbia," he acknowledged, "but in a new place where people don't know your past." She considered this, watching the flames dance before them. "Perhaps, though I fear my past will always follow me." As the days passed, Violet found herself drawn to Nathan's quiet strength and unfailing kindness. He treated her with respect when the rest of the world had turned its back. He made sure she had the most comfortable spot by the fire, the best portions of food, the extra blanket on cold nights. The other cowboys, taking their cue from their trail boss, were respectful and protective, treating her like a sister. They taught her to play poker in the evenings, laughing at her initial confusion but cheering when she won her first hand. 2 weeks into their journey, disaster struck. They were crossing a swollen creek when one of the wagon wheels caught on a submerged log. The current pulled at the wagon, threatening to overturn it. Violet cried out as she felt it beginning to tip. In an instant, Nathan was there, urging his horse into the water beside the wagon. "Jump to me," he called, extending his arm. Terrified, Violet hesitated, watching the rushing water between them. "Trust me," Nathan said, his blue eyes locked with hers. "I won't let you fall." She took a deep breath and leaped toward him. His strong arm caught her around the waist, pulling her onto his horse. The wagon toppled behind them, their supplies swept away by the current. Nathan held her tightly as he guided his horse back to the shore, her heart pounding against his chest. When they reached land, he didn't immediately release her, and for a moment, Violet felt safer than she had in months. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice husky with concern. "No," she whispered, suddenly aware of their proximity. "You saved me." He helped her down from the horse, his hands lingering at her waist longer than necessary. "We lost most of our supplies," he said, looking back at the upended wagon being retrieved by his men. "I'm sorry," Violet said, guilt washing over her. "If not for me, you wouldn't have had the wagon." "If not for you, we'd have one less person to care about," Nathan replied simply. "Supplies can be replaced." That night, huddled under shared blankets to conserve warmth, Violet realized with startling clarity that she was falling in love with Nathan Prescott. The realization terrified her. She was carrying another man's child, ruined in the eyes of society. What could she possibly offer a man like Nathan? The next day, they reached a small settlement where they could replenish their supplies. While the men took care of business, Violet wandered to the edge of town, finding a small church with a cemetery beside it. As she walked among the gravestones, a wave of melancholy washed over her. In the eyes of her father and God, if her father was to be believed, she was already dead. Would she ever find peace again? Heavy thoughts for such a young woman, a voice observed. Violet turned to see an elderly man in a clerical collar watching her with kind eyes. "I was just reflecting," she said hesitantly. "I'm Pastor Graham," he introduced himself. "This is my church, humble though it may be." "Violet Porter," she replied, omitting her connection to Reverend Porter of Columbia. "You're traveling with the cattle outfit?" he asked, nodding toward where the men were visible in town. "Yes. They've been kind enough to provide safe passage north." Pastor Graham studied her face. "You carry a burden heavier than your years warrant," he observed. "Would you care to talk about it? A stranger's ear can sometimes be the kindest." Something about his gentle manner reminded Violet of Mrs. Holloway. Before she knew it, she was sitting on a bench beside the church, pouring out her story, her love for Edward, his betrayal, her father's rejection, her uncertain future. Pastor Graham listened without interruption, his weathered face compassionate. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment. "Your father and I interpret God's teachings very differently," he finally said. "I believe in a God of love and forgiveness, not condemnation." "My father says I've sinned beyond redemption," Violet said softly. "Then your father speaks beyond his authority," Pastor Graham replied firmly. "Only God determines what can and cannot be forgiven, and his grace is limitless." His words washed over Violet like a soothing balm. For the first time since discovering her pregnancy, she felt a glimmer of hope that perhaps she wasn't eternally damned. "As for your practical concerns," he continued, "I know a doctor in Bismarck who assists at a home for women in your situation. Not a place that takes children away, but one that helps mothers get established with their little ones. I could write you a letter of introduction." Gratitude overwhelmed her. "You would do that for a stranger. We're all God's children," he said simply. "Besides, I've observed how that young man watches over you, Mr. Prescott, is it? A man like that doesn't offer protection lightly." Violet felt her cheeks warm. "We're just traveling companions." Pastor Graham's eyes twinkled knowingly. "If you say so, my dear." When she returned to camp with Pastor Graham's letter securely tucked into her dress pocket, Violet found Nathan pacing anxiously. "Where have you been?" he demanded, relief and residual worry evident in his voice. "I was about to organize a search party." "I was at the church," she explained. Speaking with Pastor Graham, Nathan's expression softened. "I should have guessed. Did you find what you were looking for?" "I think so," she replied thoughtfully. "He helped me see things differently." That night, as they prepared to resume their journey, Nathan approached her with an unexpected question. "How would you feel about taking a slight detour?" he asked. "There's a small ranch about a day's ride east of our path. It belongs to an old friend of Henderson's who's looking to sell. I'd like to see it before we continue north." "Your dream," Violet recalled. A ranch of your own, he nodded, a hint of excitement in his eyes. I've been saving every penny for years. Henderson thinks the price is fair, and the land is good. Of course we should go, Violet said, touched that he had included her in the decision. I'd like to see it too. The detour took them through rolling hills covered in spring wildflowers. The ranch, when they reached it, was modest but well-maintained. A sturdy main house, a barn, corrals, and about 500 acres of good grazing land. Mr. Finch, the elderly owner, greeted them warmly. Nathan, Henderson said you might be coming by, and who's this lovely lady? Before Violet could answer, Nathan placed a protective hand at the small of her back. This is Violet Porter, my. He hesitated, glancing at her. Friend, Violet supplied, though the word felt inadequate. Mr. Finch's eyes moved between them, a knowing smile playing at his lips. Well, any friend of Nathan's is welcome here. Come in, both of you. Martha's just made fresh bread. Inside, the house was cozy and well-loved. Mrs. Finch, a plump woman with a ready smile, ushered them to the kitchen table and insisted they eat while the men discussed business. You're expecting, aren't you, dear? Mrs. Finch asked quietly when they were alone. Violet tensed, waiting for the judgment to follow. How far along? Mrs. Finch continued, surprising her with the matter-of-fact question. About 3 months, Violet admitted. Morning sickness still bothering you? I have a tea that worked wonders for me through all 6 of mine. She busied herself preparing the brew. Traveling must be difficult in your condition. Nathan has been very considerate, Violet said. Mrs. Finch smiled knowingly. He seems like a fine man. The way he looks at you. It's not like that, Violet interjected quickly. He's helping me reach Bismarck, that's all. Is it? Mrs. Finch set the tea before her. Because a man doesn't look at a woman that way unless his heart is involved. Violet sipped the tea to avoid responding, though her pulse quickened at Mrs. Finch's words. Later, as they walked the property together, Nathan pointed out his plans. Where he'd expand the corrals, which fields needed clearing, how he'd build up the herd over time. You've thought of everything, Violet observed, charmed by his enthusiasm. Almost everything, he agreed, his expression turning serious. Violet, there's something I need to say. They stopped beside a small stream, the setting sun painting the water gold. Nathan took both her hands in his. These past weeks, traveling together, getting to know you, they've been the best of my life. Violet's heart pounded against her ribs. Nathan, please let me finish, he said gently. I know your situation is complicated. I know you're carrying another man's child. But none of that matters to me. He took a deep breath. I love you, Violet Porter. I think I started falling for you that first night on Mrs. Holloway's porch. You're the strongest, most beautiful woman I've ever known. Tears filled Violet's eyes. You can't mean that. I'm ruined, Nathan. No decent man would. I'm not concerned with what others consider decent, he interrupted. I know my own heart, and it belongs to you if you want it. What are you saying? She whispered. Nathan knelt before her, still holding her hands. I'm asking you to marry me. To stay here with me, build this ranch together, raise your child, our child together. Shock rendered Violet momentarily speechless. You would claim another man's child as your own. I would love any child of yours as my own, he corrected. I don't care what people might say or think. I only care about you. Tears spilled freely down Violet's cheeks now. But what about Bismarck? Pastor Graham's letter, if Bismarck is where you want to go, I'll take you there, Nathan promised. I'm not trying to trap you, Violet. I'm offering you a choice. A choice. After months of feeling like she had none, the gift of choosing her own path was overwhelming. What about your men? The cattle drive, she asked, stalling as her mind raced. Henderson knows this was my plan all along, to check the ranch and decide. The men can continue without me. Cooper is more than capable of leading them the rest of the way. Violet looked around at the land bathed in sunset light. She could picture it, building a life here, watching a child grow, being loved by this extraordinary man who saw past her shame to the person she truly was. "Yes," she said, her voice growing stronger with certainty. "Yes, I'll marry you, Nathan." His face lit with joy as he rose to his feet and pulled her into his arms. When his lips met hers in their first kiss, Violet felt a sense of homecoming she had never experienced before. Mr. Finch, it turned out, had been a justice of the peace before retiring to ranch life, and could still legally perform marriages. 2 days later, in the Finch's front room decorated with wildflowers, Violet and Nathan exchanged vows. She wore a simple blue dress Mrs. Finch had altered for her, with violets in her hair. Nathan wore his cleanest shirt and a new black vest purchased from the general store in the nearest town. The cowboys, who had been their traveling companions, stood as witnesses, their usual rough manners softened by the solemnity of the occasion. "I, Nathan James Prescott, take you, Violet Elizabeth Porter, to be my lawfully wedded wife," he said, his voice clear and certain. "I promise to love and cherish you all the days of my life, to protect and provide for you and our children, to be faithful and true in good times and bad, until death parts us." When Violet repeated her vows, she felt the weight of shame and fear that had burdened her for months begin to lift. This man, this good, honorable man, had chosen her, knowing everything. "By the authority vested in me by the territory of Montana," Mr. Finch proclaimed, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Nathan's kiss was gentle but filled with promise. The small gathering erupted in cheers, Mrs. Finch dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. That night, in the small cabin Mr. Finch had built for ranch hands but which would serve as their temporary home until the main house was ready for them, Nathan treated Violet with such tenderness that she wept with gratitude. "I never thought I'd know happiness again," she confessed as they lay together in the darkness. "Get used to it, Mrs. Prescott," he replied, kissing her forehead. "I intend to make you happy for a very long time." The cowboys departed the next morning, continuing their journey north with the cattle. Violet and Nathan stood arm in arm, waving until they disappeared over the horizon. "Well, Mrs. Prescott," Nathan said, turning to her with a smile that made her heart skip, "shall we begin?" The months that followed were filled with hard work and deep joy. They purchased the ranch from the Finches, who stayed on long enough to help them get established. Nathan brought in their first small herd of cattle, the beginning of what he hoped would become a prosperous operation. Violet made the cabin into a home, planting a garden, learning to cook on her own, preparing for the baby. As her body changed, Nathan's love and desire for her never wavered. He marveled at her growing belly, talking to the child within as if it were already his own. In the nearest town of Clearwater, 12 miles east, they were accepted as a young married couple expecting their first child. No one questioned that the baby might have been conceived before their marriage. Such calculations were considered impolite in frontier society, where survival often depended on community support rather than moral judgment. Violet wrote to Mrs. Holloway, sharing her happiness and inviting her to visit whenever she wished. The reply, when it came, brought mixed emotions. "Your father still refuses to speak your name," Mrs. Holloway wrote, "but your mother slips into church early each Sunday to pray for you. Your sisters ask about you when they can. The town gossip has largely moved on to fresher scandals. Edward Blackwell returned briefly, but left again when he learned of your departure. Some say he's married a banker's daughter in Helena. The news about Edward stung less than Violet would have expected. She had loved him once, or thought she had. But what she felt for Nathan made that earlier attachment seem pale and insubstantial by comparison. As summer turned to autumn, Violet's time grew near. Nathan insisted on bringing a doctor from Clearwater to stay at the ranch during her final weeks, an expense they could ill afford but which he deemed necessary. "I won't risk losing you," he said firmly when she protested. "You and the baby are everything to me, Doctor." Wilson, a kindly man in his 50s, arrived with his medical bag and a trunk full of books to occupy his time while they waited. He examined Violet daily, pronouncing her healthy and the baby well-positioned. "You've married a remarkable woman, Prescott, Doctor," Wilson commented one evening as they sat on the porch. "Most first-time mothers are beside themselves with worry by now." Nathan smiled proudly. "She's the strongest person I know." "And the baby?" the doctor asked quietly, his expression serious. "You're prepared to raise another man's child as your own." "He's not another man's child," Nathan corrected. "He's Violet's child, and that makes him mine too." Dr. Wilson nodded approvingly. "Not many men would see it that way." "Then they're fools," Nathan replied simply. The labor began on a crisp October morning as the first light painted the eastern sky. Violet woke Nathan with a hand on his arm, her eyes wide. "It's time," she whispered. What followed was 14 hours of the most intense pain Violet had ever experienced. "Doctor." Wilson directed everything with calm efficiency. Nathan refused to leave her side, holding her hand, wiping her brow, whispering encouragement when her strength faltered. "You can do this, my love," he said again and again. "You're the strongest woman I know." As the sun set on that autumn day, their son entered the world with a lusty cry that filled the small cabin. Dr. Wilson cleaned and swaddled him before placing him in Violet's trembling arms. "He's perfect," she breathed, counting tiny fingers and toes, marveling at the tuft of dark hair so unlike her own light brown or Nathan's sandy color. Nathan sat beside them on the bed, his arm around Violet's shoulders, gazing at the infant with undisguised wonder. "Hello, son," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We've been waiting for you. What will you name him?" Dr. Wilson asked as he packed his instruments. Violet looked at Nathan questioningly. They had discussed names but made no final decision. "Samuel," Nathan said firmly. "After his grandfather." Tears filled Violet's eyes at this unexpected gesture toward reconciliation with her father. "Samuel James Prescott," she agreed. Dr. Wilson stayed 2 more days to ensure both mother and baby were thriving before returning to Clearwater. Life settled into a new rhythm centered around the infant's needs. Nathan took over many of Violet's usual chores, insisting she rest and recover. "The cattle can wait," he said when she protested. "You and Samuel cannot." As winter descended, bringing snow and bitter cold, the small family huddled together in their cabin. Nathan read aloud in the evenings adventure stories, poetry, passages from the Bible. Violet sang lullabies to Samuel, rocking him before the fire. They celebrated Christmas quietly, exchanging simple gifts. Nathan had carved a wooden horse for Samuel, though the baby was far too young to appreciate it. Violet had knitted Nathan a new scarf, working on it secretly during Samuel's naps. "I have something for you too," Nathan said, pulling a small package from his pocket. Inside was a delicate gold locket. When Violet opened it, she found a tiny portrait of Nathan on one side, the other side empty. "For Samuel's picture when we can get one made," he explained. Violet clutched the locket to her chest, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "It's beautiful." "So are you," he replied, kissing her tenderly. "My wife, the mother of my son." By spring, Samuel was a chubby, cheerful baby who laughed easily and adored his father. Nathan spent hours with him, carrying him around the ranch, showing him the cattle, the horses, the vast Montana sky. "He'll be a rancher like his pa," Nathan would declare proudly. "Or perhaps a preacher like his grandfather," Violet would tease in return. The ranch prospered under Nathan's careful management. They were able to hire 2 hands to help with the expanding herd. The cabin was enlarged to accommodate their growing needs. Nathan spoke of building a proper house the following year. In May, a letter arrived that changed everything. Mrs. Holloway wrote that Reverend Porter had suffered a severe stroke. He was partially paralyzed and unable to preach. The church had appointed a new minister. Violet's mother was struggling to care for her husband and maintain the household. "I must go to them," Violet said after reading the letter aloud to Nathan. "Whatever has passed between us, they're still my family." Nathan studied her face. "Are you sure? Your father may still reject you." "I have to try," she insisted, "for my mother's sake if nothing else." 2 days later, they set out for Columbia, a journey of several days with a baby in tow. Nathan had hired extra hands to manage the ranch in their absence, unsure how long they would be gone. As they approached the town where Violet had experienced such shame and rejection, anxiety knotted her stomach. Samuel, now 7 months old, sensed her tension and grew fussy in her arms. "We can turn back," Nathan offered as the first buildings came into view. "No one would blame you." Violet shook her head. "I'm not the same frightened girl who ran away. I'm Violet Prescott now. Wife, mother, rancher's wife. I have nothing to be ashamed of." Nathan's hand covered hers, his eyes full of pride. "That's my brave girl, Mrs. Holloway welcomed them with open arms, insisting they stay with her rather than at the hotel. She cooed over Samuel, declaring him the most beautiful baby she'd ever seen. "Your mother knows you're coming," she told Violet. "I sent word as soon as I received your reply. She's been cleaning and preparing your old room for days." "And my father?" Violet asked hesitantly. Mrs. Holloway's expression sobered. "He says little these days. The stroke affected his speech, but your mother believes seeing you and the baby might help his recovery." The next morning, Violet stood before her childhood home, Samuel in her arms, Nathan at her side. The house looked smaller than she remembered, the white paint faded, the garden less tidy. Before she could knock, the door opened to reveal her mother, Elizabeth Porter, thinner and grayer than Violet recalled, her eyes filling with tears at the sight of her eldest daughter and the baby in her arms. "Violet," she breathed, reaching out tentatively as if afraid her daughter might disappear. "You came." "Hello, Mother," Violet replied, her own voice thick with emotion. Elizabeth's gaze moved to Nathan, questioning. "This is my husband, Nathan Prescott," Violet introduced him. "And our son, Samuel." Something flickered in Elizabeth's eyes at the word "our," but she merely nodded and stepped back to allow them entry. "Your father is in the parlor," she said quietly. "He can't move much, but his mind is clear." Reverend Samuel Porter sat in an armchair by the window, a blanket over his lap despite the spring warmth. His once powerful frame had diminished, his right side visibly weaker than his left. When he saw Violet, his eyes widened, and he made a sound in his throat. Violet approached slowly, Samuel wriggling in her arms. "Hello, Father," she said formally. "I've brought your grandson to meet you." The Reverend's eyes moved from Violet to the baby, then to Nathan standing protectively behind them. He made another strangled sound, his left hand lifting slightly. Elizabeth hurried to his side. "He wants to touch the baby," she explained. "Is that all right?" Violet hesitated only briefly before bringing Samuel closer. Her father's trembling hand reached out, fingers brushing the baby's cheek. Samuel, always friendly, grabbed the extended finger and gurgled happily. Something remarkable happened then. A tear slid down Reverend Porter's weathered cheek, followed by another. His mouth worked as he struggled to form words. Forgive, he finally managed, the words slurred but unmistakable. Violet knelt beside his chair, Samuel in her lap. There's nothing to forgive, Father. We're family. You cast her out, Nathan said, his voice level but firm. But God brought her to me. Your loss became my greatest blessing. Elizabeth gasped at his boldness, but the Reverend simply nodded, more tears flowing freely now. That visit marked the beginning of healing. They stayed in Columbia for 2 weeks, during which Violet's sisters fawned over their nephew. Townspeople who had once shunned her now stopped to admire the baby. And even Mr. Bailey at the general store offered a belated wedding gift. Reverend Porter made slow progress in his speech therapy, but by the time they prepared to return to the ranch, he could say Samuel clearly, and the baby would beam at the sound of his name in his grandfather's voice. "Will you come visit us?" Violet asked her mother as they packed the wagon. "When Father is stronger, the ranch is beautiful and the air would do him good." Elizabeth glanced back at the house that had been her prison as much as her home. "I would like that very much," she said softly. As they drove away, Violet leaned against Nathan's shoulder, Samuel sleeping peacefully in her lap. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" he asked, his arm tightening around her. "For everything. For loving me when I thought myself unlovable. For giving Samuel a name and a future. For standing beside me today." Nathan kissed the top of her head. "I told you the day we married, you and Samuel are everything to me. That will never change." The journey back to the ranch felt like a homecoming in the truest sense. As they crested the final hill and saw their land spread before them, Violet felt a surge of gratitude so intense it brought tears to her eyes. "Look, Samuel," Nathan said, lifting the baby high. "That's your kingdom, son. Someday it will all be yours." Samuel squealed with delight, little arms waving. "He might choose a different path," Violet cautioned. "He might want to be a doctor or a lawyer or even a preacher." Nathan grinned. "Then he'll be the first preacher who knows how to brand a steer and mend fences." Life settled back into its rhythm, but with a newfound peace. Letters flowed regularly between Columbia and the ranch. Violet's sisters visited that summer, bringing news that Reverend Porter had returned to church, not to preach but to worship, humbled by his illness and the forgiveness he had received. In the fall, Violet discovered she was expecting again. Nathan's joy knew no bounds. "Another Prescott to help run the ranch," he declared, spinning her around the kitchen until she was breathless with laughter. "And if it's a girl," she teased, "then she'll be as beautiful and strong as her mother," he replied without hesitation. "And heaven help any young man who comes calling." As Violet's pregnancy progressed, she reflected on how completely her life had transformed in just 2 years. From the depths of shame and rejection to the heights of love and acceptance. From a girl cowering before her father's judgment to a woman standing proudly beside her husband, raising one child and expecting another. Samuel's first birthday was celebrated with a small gathering that included Mrs. Holloway, who had traveled all the way from Columbia for the occasion. She watched with satisfaction as the family she had helped create celebrated together. "You did well, girl," she told Violet privately. "Nathan Prescott is everything I hoped he would be when I first suggested you travel with his outfit." Violet's eyes widened. "You planned this, Mrs." Holloway's eyes twinkled mischievously. "Let's just say I recognized a good man when I saw one, and a young woman who deserved happiness after too much sorrow." In March of 1878, Violet gave birth to a daughter they named Elizabeth Rose, after both their mothers. Nathan was as besotted with his daughter as he was with his son, declaring her the most beautiful baby ever born. Until the next one, Violet teased weakly from her bed. Nathan kissed her tenderly. "There's no rush, my love. We have all the time in the world." That summer, Elizabeth Porter came to visit, bringing Violet's youngest sister with her. Reverend Porter remained in Columbia, still too frail for extended travel but reportedly improving steadily. "He reads your letters aloud each night," Elizabeth confided. "He keeps Samuel's portrait on his bedside table." The ranch prospered as the years passed. Nathan's careful management and forward thinking paid off. They built a proper house with enough rooms for their growing family and frequent visitors. The original cabin became a bunkhouse for the hired hands. Samuel grew into a sturdy, thoughtful boy who adored his father and followed him everywhere. Elizabeth Rose Lizzie to the family was spirited and bright, with Violet's light brown hair and Nathan's blue eyes. When Samuel was 5, old enough to begin understanding the complexities of family, Violet and Nathan sat him down for a conversation they had long planned. "You know how much Papa and I love you," Violet began carefully. "To the moon and back," Samuel declared, repeating their nightly ritual. Nathan pulled the boy onto his lap. "That's right. And nothing will ever change that, but there's something special about you that we want you to know." They explained in simple terms a child could understand that Nathan had not been there when Samuel began growing in Violet's tummy, but that he had chosen to be Samuel's papa from the moment they met. Samuel considered this solemnly. "So you picked me?" he finally asked Nathan. "I sure did," Nathan confirmed. "Best decision I ever made next to marrying your mama." The boy's face broke into a wide smile. "That's even better than being born your son," he decided, "because you wanted me on purpose." Violet exchanged a glance with Nathan, tears of relief and love shining in both their eyes. As the children grew, so did the ranch and their connection to the community. Nathan served on the school board when a proper schoolhouse was built in Clearwater. Violet taught Sunday school at the small church that had been established nearby. Samuel showed a natural aptitude for ranching, absorbing everything Nathan taught him about cattle, horses, and land management. Lizzie revealed a talent for numbers, keeping the ranch books with remarkable accuracy from a young age. 2 more children joined the family over the years, Thomas in 1880 and Rebecca in 1883, rounding out what Violet called her perfect quartet. In the spring of 1884, a letter arrived from Columbia bearing news that Reverend Samuel Porter had passed away peacefully in his sleep. Violet grieved the father she had known in her childhood and the humbler man he had become in his final years. At the funeral, she stood with Nathan and their 4 children, accepting condolences from townspeople who had once shunned her. Many commented on Samuel, now 9, and bearing a striking resemblance to the grandfather he was named for. "He has the Reverend's bearing," one elderly church member observed, "and his eyes. He'll make a fine man someday." "He already is a fine boy," Nathan replied proudly, his hand on his son's shoulder, "with a heart as big as Montana." Elizabeth Porter returned with them to the ranch, moving into the spacious bedroom they had always kept ready for her. At 62, she was still vigorous enough to help with the younger children and the household, allowing Violet more time to assist with the ranch's expanding business. On a warm summer evening in 1886, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant hues, Nathan took Violet's hand in his. "You ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "The path your life took," Violet looked at him in surprise. "Regret? How could I? You might have had an easier life. Your father might not have cast you out if I hadn't fallen in love foolishly. If I hadn't trusted Edward's empty promises. She squeezed his hand. Nathan, every step of that painful journey led me to you, to our children, to this life we've built together. How could I regret that? He pulled her close, his arm around her shoulders. 10 years, he marveled. 10 years since I found you on Mrs. Holloway's porch. The best 10 years of my life, Violet replied, resting her head on his shoulder, and many more to come. Inside the house, they could hear their children's laughter mingling with Elizabeth's voice as she told them stories of Violet's childhood. Outside, the ranch stretched before them, cattle grazing peacefully, the evening star appearing in the darkening sky. I love you, Violet Prescott, Nathan whispered, his lips brushing her temple. More today than yesterday, less than tomorrow. And I love you, she replied, her heart full. The man who saw value in a fallen preacher's daughter, the man who loved a child not of his blood as his own. The man who gave me a life beyond anything I could have imagined. As night fell over the Montana ranch, Violet reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From shame to honor, from rejection to acceptance, from a preacher's disgraced daughter to a rancher's beloved wife. The path had not been easy, but it had led her home to a life filled with love, purpose, and the family she and Nathan had built together. A life that had begun the moment a kind-hearted cowboy had offered a fallen woman not just safe passage, but a future bright with promise.